So we're in this series on the parables, but can I tell you really quick, one of the things I really appreciate about Jesus, I appreciate a lot of things about Jesus, obviously, but one of the things I really appreciate is that there are times when Jesus kind of strips everything down and takes off the fluff, and it's just really practical stuff that Jesus talks about. Practical advice for literally how you and I might just navigate even today, just the different choices that we make and stuff like that. Growing up, I don't know if anybody else is like this, I was told that street smarts were better than book smarts. How many of you kind of got that logic? Like, you know what, Rich? Like, you can have all the answers, but then when you actually go out on the street or live your life, okay, like what you say you know translates very poorly into some of the basic decisions of life, like common sense decisions, right? My parents were notorious for saying, Rich, you're making this more complicated than it really is. Quit thinking. Like, be simple. Be really, really simple. One of the things I appreciate about Jesus is that sometimes he gets really, really simple. He gets to my level so that I can kind of understand some basic stuff. Let me give you an example. So it's one thing to talk about, I had to write this down. It's one thing to talk about soteriology in relation to the question of substitutionary atonement and the act of sacrifice Jesus made for each of us, or the hermeneutical impact of the law of Moses is seen exemplified in the life and the teaching of Jesus, or the salvific certainties that we can build a systematic theology on predicated by a proper exegesis of the Pentateuch, citing only Wesleyan Armenian scholars who have taken all of Jesus' words and then compiled them into a concordance so that they might better be understood and interpreted in the vein of contemporary ecclesiology. Amen. That's right. Or we could just take Jesus' advice and don't be a punk. This is my mug, my coffee with Jesus every day, where he says, don't be a punk. Let me tell you the biggest challenge I have with this mug, because I would love just to tell everybody else, don't be a punk. I'm right-handed. So that means it's always facing me when I take a drink, all right? So, sometimes Jesus does cut through the fluff. It's like, you're making it a little harder than it is. Don't be a punk. Don't be a punk. All right, so our series in these parables, man, some of these have been heavy, okay? There's a lot of layers to some of these. And what I'm really excited about today is that this is actually a twofer. So it's 2 for 1. These two little, very, very short parables that are sandwiched together, super practical, super basic. The lesson is super, super simple. And for a guy like me, I'm like, that sounds perfect, absolutely perfect. So here they are. I'm excited. So Luke 14, 28 through 32. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation, you're not able to finish it, everyone who sees it is going to ridicule you, saying, that guy started to build and wasn't able to finish. Or, here's the second one, suppose a king's about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he's able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he's not able, he's going to send a delegation while the other is still a long way off. He's going to ask for terms of peace. Super basic. Like, I feel a little embarrassed standing up here trying to explain this to you because it's very, very simple, right? The lesson is count the cost. That's the lesson. The lesson of these parables is we're supposed to count the cost. And I am sure that all of us can think of times where we did something or said something or didn't do something or whatever, and we failed to count the cost and we paid the price. Can you think of a situation that you've ever gone through? Counting the cost. For us today, Jesus' words are super common sense. Like common sense lessons. There's no need to get scholarly with this. There's no hidden words like we have to figure out what the Greek meaning of it was and all this other stuff. It literally is just super straightforward. For example, he says, getting ready to build something? Sit down. Decide if you can afford it before you start pouring concrete. That's pretty common sense, right? Oh, can I pay for the concrete? like you ask those questions, you sit down and you count the cost. We usually think financially, at least I do sometimes, but it could be a cost of anything. If you're getting ready to do something, getting ready to sign up for something, getting ready to change something, do I have the time What's the cost of time? What's the cost of my personal well-being or my stress? What are the costs of me doing this thing or being a part of this thing or not doing this thing? What is the cost? It's counting the cost. When Shelley and I, we bought a house in January of 2022. 22, yeah? We don't remember. Every day's it wasn't that long ago. Whatever month that, I know it's January because it's not fun to move in January. So that's when we did it. But anyway, when we were looking around, so we were looking at houses. We make giant people in our family, like giant people just giants. And so we needed space, a little bit of space, but we're also kind of in that almost empty nest kind of phase too. So we're looking around, and man, there's these nice houses that are really big, but they're kind of out of our range that we feel comfortable paying. We can pay for it, but we also want to still be able to give and do what we need to do and all that kind of different stuff. But then there's other houses that are smaller that have been redone, but then you're like, oh, that's really, really small, especially if they all show up like this weekend. You're like, okay, like we would like to have a private conversation in our house somewhere. And then there's other houses, and I know you guys know this too. There's all these houses that are in that in-between phase that you're like, wow, that's a good price. And then you go in and see it, and you're like, I know why now. This needs to be redone. And the problem is I have a full-time job. I don't need another full-time job to live in a house. And so there's all of these different things. But the point I'm saying is that Shelley and I actually sat down, and we were like, what are our needs? What are we comfortable with? What do we want to do? What do we not want to do? How does this impact our lives before we made a decision? You count the cost. And I wish I could tell you that Shelley and I have been that prudent with every single decision in our life. We have, because we're perfect. Why are you laughing? None of us bat 1,000, right? Like there are decisions that we make sometimes, and we suffer the consequences, stupid decisions. I think as John Wayne once said, life is hard, but it's harder when you're stupid. That's really nice. Thanks, John. I've made stupid decisions, though, I know that have made hard situations even worse, harder. And maybe you have too, but we need to count the cost. But then what Jesus does is he kind of turns a corner here, because it's easy to joke about that one a little bit. Not so easy to joke about decisions that you might make that put the lives of thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people on the line. It says, maybe you should sit down and count cost before you decide to go to war. He uses war as this example. Only somebody who is super careless with life, or somebody who's driven by ego or pride or whatever, only somebody like that would be so silly as to not sit down and be prudent and count the cost and evaluate all of it before making those decisions, to make sure that the battle could be won. So Jesus' advice in this sense is actually life-saving, common sense advice, right? Sit down and consider. Those are the words he uses. Sit down and consider, common sense. Okay, now, I just want to tell you how grateful I am for Jesus, because in a couple short months, we are going to celebrate the incarnation. This is God becoming flesh and dwelling among us, experiencing the fullness of the life that you and I experience. He knows what it's like to be frustrated. Jesus knows what it's like to be hungry. He knows what it's like to mourn the loss of a friend. Jesus knows what it's like to stub his toe. I mean, Jesus knows all of the fully human experiences. He knows the temptations. He knows the temptations that come along with being human, and you can use your imagination and fill in any temptation. Jesus can come alongside of you and understand what it is that you're facing. I really, really appreciate that. He knew what it was like for all of that. He also knew what it was like to be tempted with something to jump on really quick. In fact, in the wilderness, he was tempted 3 times to circumvent things and take something. He knew what it was like to be tempted to not count the cost. Okay. And so in today's gospel, in this passage, we see, again, this really super, super practical, common sense lesson from the parables of Jesus. Count the what? I just try to make sure I still got you. Count the cost. Okay. And as a pastor, my questions for you then, right now, would be this. Is there anything in your life that you're being hasty about? Pause. Sit. Be still. Super hard right now, right? Just pause. Stop. Be still. Count the cost. And then ask God to lead you. Ask God to lead you. So is there anything in your life that you're being hasty about right now? So this could be the end of a really, really super practical sermon. This sounds good because I'll be honest with you. These parables, these have not been easy messages. I was in and out of town and all kinds of different stuff through the summer. I was feeling a little guilty because I wasn't up here as much as I normally am. So I've been on a solid run. And so every week, sitting down and working through these has been really difficult because these parables are not easy. They're kind of heavy duty. And I don't know about you, but this has been a hard few weeks. And especially like 2 weeks ago, when we talked about the forgiveness thing. Oof, man, that's a hard message for me to share because I have to dance through that stuff too. I have to wrestle with those things. And then last week, following through on what you start. Isn't it amazing and wonderful? Don't you get so excited that you climb out of bed, come here on a Sunday morning to be reminded where you don't measure up? Isn't that fun? Do it again next week, Pastor Rich. Tell us where we're falling short, where we fail. Okay, but that was it. It was how do you finish what you start? How do you finish what you start? And then, holy moly, like after Easter, all the way through the summer, we did that reclamation series. That was a series where we literally spent all of our time in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And it's stuff like love your enemies and turn the other cheek and all this stuff. And I don't know about you, I bet there were people here in this room right now who are like halfway through the Sermon on the Mount and they're like, okay, can we turn the channel at least for a week or something? Like, after a while, this is seriously heavy stuff. So we're kind of carrying all this different stuff. So it's nice, I'll be honest, for Jesus to throw us a bone a little bit every once in a while and be like, here's an easy one. This is low-hanging fruit. Don't go build something if you don't get the money. Don't go launching a war if you don't think you can win it and waste a bunch of people's lives. Count the cost. Sit down, be prudent, use your brain that I gave you in creation, and count the cost. So count the cost before you jump into that relationship, before you make a major purchase or some other major decision. Just count the cost. This is a super, super practical lesson. How many of you think I'm done? See, I'm a little smart. I'm not going to ask you how many of you think I should be done. Here's the problem. The parables aren't lessons. They're not lessons. This parable, yes, he says count the cost, but this is not about counting the cost. That's not the lesson of this parable. This is a parable, and these are parables about lordship. Lordship. So here's the problem that we have. These are sandwiched between some stuff. It starts with this. There's all kinds of crowds that are chasing Jesus around. He says, if anybody comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Whoever doesn't carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Let me tell you really two practical lessons. Count the cost before you build something. Count the cost before you go to war. Two nice little stories after telling us to hate people. Then he finishes it up with this one. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Okay. So Jesus' parables are not lessons. They're paradigm shifters. They're designed to make us think differently. So quickly, what we're going to do is what we have to do with the parables. We have to work to understand what it is that Jesus wants to ask you. We have to work to understand this. So, let's talk about this. So Jesus, he didn't fit. He did not fit the religious mold of the day. He did not fit the religious patterns of the day. And it's no different today. If Jesus walked in here today physically and sat down among us, he would be the odd man out. He would be the one that looks like he doesn't fit, because it doesn't fit into those religious systems. He just doesn't fit into it. Jesus' life and his teaching kept the spirit of the religious law, okay? It kept the spirit of those things, but it kept the spirit by doing things that didn't fit. Like, he would end up loving the marginalized people. He would end up touching people you weren't supposed to touch. He would have dinner with people you weren't supposed to even associate with or talk to. Like, he broke every religious rule that was there, but he kept the spirit of the law. Daily, Jesus literally stood in opposition to the hypocrisy and the show and the performance, and I'll just use the church of the day. He stood totally in opposition of that and exposed it, okay? And here's the problem with that. There were some other people that watched Jesus doing that and were like, yeah, I don't like the system either. I don't like what it's done to me. I don't like what it's done to my people. I don't like how it makes me feel. Jesus is like putting a smackdown on the religious system. I like that. And so they start following him. They start chasing him everywhere. Plus, he's doing amazing things. He's like healing people. People who couldn't walk can walk now. People who couldn't see can see now. And he's feeding everybody. Listen, you want to get a crowd, feed people. Show up on a Wednesday night for Sloppy Joe's, whatever. But you feed people, right? And so there's all of this stuff that's going on, and all of a sudden, Jesus is standing in contrast to, he's standing in contrast also to a religious system that had married itself to a political empire. And these people were like, we don't want the Romans. We don't want to be married to a political empire. And so Jesus is like, you don't have to be. You're living in it, but you don't have to be. And all of a sudden, there's all this tension that's going on, and Jesus makes some decisions. He makes some statements, and people notice, including the religious leaders. They notice because somewhere along the line, the religious leaders are checking, all right, man, I'm on Insta now, and okay, oh man, our followers, through the roof. I'm going to check on Jesse over here, and I'm going to check on Carl, and I'm going to check on Bob and Sue, and da-da-da-da. Wait a minute. How come they're not in my friends list on Facebook anymore? They're not even following me. What? I'm a Levite priest, man. I'm super important. Like, don't they know? Like, the things that I say are the things that are law. The things that I do, the way we operate, that's how it's supposed to happen. And now they're not my followers anymore. Well, okay. They liked what Jesus said 2 weeks ago. They loved what, wait a minute, is that a heart? They hearted what Jesus said 2 weeks ago. And I didn't see him at the synagogue last week, but I also know Jesus was in Capernaum last week, and so, yeah, they checked in Capernaum last week. All of a sudden, you have all these religious leaders that are like, what the heck? We're getting unfollowed. We're getting unfollowed, and they're transferring their followership to Jesus, and they're just traveling with him too. Like, don't they understand? This is where you bring the offering every week? Like, if they don't do that, what are they doing with it? They're probably giving their offering to Jesus. I know, giving's public record. I'm just kidding, it's not. Just so you know, if you give, your giving's not public knowledge. So they're realizing we're losing people. We're losing people, and Jesus is gaining a following. Now, by the time that we get to this passage, there's some things that are shifting. There literally are a ton of people going wherever Jesus is. And again, I mentioned the dinner thing. If you can get dinner and a show, I mean, it's a pretty good deal. He fed 5,000 people at one point, and he's doing miracles. I mean, it's amazing. But you have to start asking, why are people following? That's the question. And it's a hard question that Jesus asks all the time. Why are you following? Because of what you get? Or because of who I am? Now, that seems like a really cold question to ask a bunch of people who showed up at a church on a Sunday morning. We're here, Pastor Rich, for obvious reasons. Because of Jesus, okay. But Jesus at some point turns and sees these crowds and says stuff like, all you guys care about are signs and wonders. Like, I don't think you get it. Or he shows up in Jerusalem riding on a donkey. That's not how a king enters Jerusalem. Or he turns around and faces a crowd of people who are literally have left their jobs behind and all kinds of different weird stuff to follow him. And he turns around and says stuff like, you probably need to think about like love and hate. And I'm going to lean towards hate when it comes to your family. I'm going to lean towards hate when it comes to your friends. And people are like, I can imagine the disciples, they're checking their Insta too. They're like, oh, he's not just following Jesus, he's following me too. I'm one of those guys. I'm awesome. Da, 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 da. And they hear Jesus say, oh, by the way, you got to hate your dad and your mom. They're like, whoa. There's like panic. They're like, oh, did he tag me in that comment? Oh, and you're freaking out. And then you hear him just keep on going. Oh, by the way, you gotta hate yourself. You gotta hate yourself. Like, no. Like, that is not how this works. That is not how you build a following. You don't say stuff like that. It's almost, you know those love-hate tattoos? This is where my mind went this week. Love and hate. You ever see those? LOVEHATE on the knuckles that people get tattooed? Maybe you got them. It's almost like Jesus, the left is a love, and Jesus is really a righty. It's almost like he's been boxing, but he's been pretending he's a lefty. He's a southpaw this whole time. Like he comes across with that jab and all that power in his left. Love, love, love. And then all of a sudden he's like, haha, I'm a righty. And he switches over and starts throwing these hate punches. It's like, where did this come from? What in the world? This is the same Jesus. Again, this is messed up. I want to make this soft for us. I really do. There's a part of me, this people-pleasing part of me, that's just like, I got to soften this up. But the reality is Jesus used the words that he used. So what in the world? This is a head scratcher, okay? Because this is the same Jesus who says stuff like, you're supposed to love your parents and honor your parents. You're supposed to serve other people and think of other people first. These are all the things that he's been saying. You've got to do this, you've got to do that. Even love your enemies, right? So what's with the switch up here? Like, where is this going? What in the world are you saying? To follow me is to hate your parents, spouse, kids, siblings, even your own life. If you don't, you should unfollow. If you're not going to do those things, you should unfollow. Okay. Again, the disciples are freaking out, I can imagine, because hate is a horrible word. Our world is full of it. Yet we have Jesus saying, add more. Why would he say that? One of our challenges is language. I don't know about you, but I hear the word hate. Immediately my mind thinks anger and violence. You use the word hate, it sounds like anger, violence. It's a posture against someone or against somebody in response. So it's emotionally driven. That's what I think of when I hear the word hate. It's the same thing that happens when we think of the word love. In our context, love is emotional. You know, there's a lot of feeling and emotion involved in love, which is not a wrong thing. But biblically speaking, the love that Jesus is most often talking about is a decision. It's a choice with actions tied to it. It's that kind of love. And so it's this love-hate dichotomy that Jesus is talking about. It means to contrast to something else, to hold things in their proper place. So, follow me here. To hate a person is to hold a contrasting position to something or somebody else. So, what's he getting at? What's he saying? Following Jesus is a radical departure from the normal stuff. It's different. And when you live like Jesus, there's a cost. If you want to follow Jesus and live like Jesus, there will be consequences to those choices that you make, those choices that you take. The reality is we live life with anyone and anything vying for our loyalty. If you haven't figured that out, how many of you have gotten political texts? Those are fun, right? Anybody is vying for your loyalty right now in so many different ways. But when you live like Jesus, there are consequences. There's a fallout. There's a cost. Maybe your family rejects you. Maybe your family doesn't have the same beliefs, doesn't have the same convictions that you do because you're following Jesus. Or maybe your decisions to follow Jesus in the way that you believe Jesus is asking you to follow him has cost you some social capital with some friends. Maybe that's happened. Maybe you have to say no to cutting some corners on a job because you're convicted by the Holy Spirit that that's not the right thing to do. And your employer gets upset at you because your conviction in following Jesus is causing you to make those kinds of decisions. Or, let's go positive, maybe God's asking you to do something. Maybe God's asking you to do something absolutely radical. What if God's asking you to sell all your stuff and liquidate as much asset as you can so that you can go live among the unhoused people and be the light of Jesus to some of them, living a sustenance lifestyle? That's just a thought. But what if God's asking you to do something that costs? Things that you really need to do, but you'd have to say no to some other things that you might really, really want. You might even have to say no to the opinions of some other people because they think you're crazy. Why would you do that stuff? You're crazy. The reality is we do. We live our lives with everything vying for some kind of lordship position in our life to dictate what we say and what we do. And way too many times we give way too much credence to that voice or that person or that movement or that party or whatever it is. Only Jesus should be Lord. Only Jesus should be Lord. But we are so tempted to give credence to anything else that will call the shots, and we're fickle and opinionated and all the things. And here's the problem. Anything less than Jesus makes a very inconsistent Lord in your life. Anything less than Jesus makes an inconsistent Lord in your life. And I could quote scripture. I could come up with a million reasons why your job or your relationship or your addiction or your spouse or your kids or any of the things, good or bad, are not consistent things to give lordship-like loyalty to, Christ-like loyalty to. And I know there's a part of us, because it's in me too. Maybe you're not like me, and maybe that's a really good thing. But I know it's in me too, that wants to give the Lord-like credence to other voices, to other things. And it's a constant battle for me to do what Jesus says, take up my cross daily and follow him, to lay myself down and pick up a cross. And it's in that picking up that cross, that's where joy is found. That's where real life is found. So when you pick up his cross, you begin to bear his burden and lay your burdens down. There's this, and I don't like the word, but I'll use it. It's a transactional kind of a moment where you're trading your lordship allegiances even to yourself for the lordship of the one who breathed breath into your life, who gives you life, who gives you every good and perfect thing that you experience in this world today. He's given you all of those things. This is this moment of lordship. Can some of the things that we're tempted to give lordship to and loyalty to, can those be good things? Absolutely. Jesus is not literally saying, call your parents up and say, we're over, click, and writing your kids out of the will. First of all, who does this anymore? I am so Generation X. Instead, I'm cool, pastor. Unfollow. Okay, I'm not a cool pastor. But here's the deal. Jesus isn't asking you to do those things. He's not saying write the kids out of the will. He's not saying all of those things. He chose a language that was radical because in comparison to the loyalty of what it looks like to follow him, and this goes in that big book that one day is going to be written called The Hard Sayings of Jesus. This is a hard saying of Jesus because it's Jesus confronting a mass of people who are there. Some of them are there for the right reasons. I want to make sure that we understand that. But there's a lot of people that are giving temporary loyalty to him because of what they're receiving from him. That's not a long-standing relationship. It's not. I'm so glad that my wife doesn't stick with me just because what she gets out of me. We'd have been done a long time ago. And she probably is thankful that the same is not so that's not how love works. That's not how relationships work. So what's he getting at here? He's clarifying the issue of lordship. Lordship. For the people who've been gathering in the wake of what is going on, there's a cost to following him, and they need to consider it. They need to weigh it and then make a decision. Again, the word hate is alarming because in the order of priority to follow Jesus, he is saying that all other loyalties in life give way to the primary loyalty of following Jesus. They appear as hate compared to the loyalty you had to following Jesus in his kingdom. There's a reason that Scripture records that in one of these moments where Jesus turns and speaks to the crowd like this, it says, many of them unfollowed. Many of them went home because they did count the cost, and it was too much. So much for practical daily living Jesus today. These two nice little lessons. But let me ask you, do you want a Jesus who tells you what you need or what you want? What Jesus is saying is actually for their benefit, and it's for ours too. And let me tell you why. And this is the nugget of hope I want you to hang on to. This is so good. What Jesus is communicating to all of those people, and I think what he's communicating to us in the midst of this parable too, is not just finish what you start, not just count the cost for what you're about to do, but I think he's also communicating because in just a couple chapters later, he will ride into Jerusalem. He will pray a prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweating blood drops because of the strain, and he will surrender himself and give himself as a sacrifice on a cross. He's about to make these decisions, and he does it because he looks at those people he turns around and faces and says, you need to count the cost because I have, and I'm doing it for you. I have, and you are worth it. You are worth it. And I think he's also saying, going back to last week's parable, what I've started in you, I'm going to see this through. So you need to count the cost. Because he says stuff like foxes have holes and other people have places to lay their head. I'm just here to give myself, and I give myself for you. This is a radical way of living. And I'll be honest, I think this is a wrestling point for every single church in the United States of America today. What kind of church are we going to be? Are we the kind of a church that wrestles with what it looks like to walk out of a place like this as the living embodiment of Jesus Christ in the world today, the hands and feet of Jesus Christ in the world that we find ourselves in? If we do that and truly do it, not just in word but in deed, there's a cost. There's a cost to that, but we make that cost. We pay that cost. We're willing to do those things, not because it's the right thing to do or because a church says we should do those things, we don't do it to get on Facebook. We don't do any of those things. The reason that we do it is because he already sees what he's begun in you, and he's going to see that through to completion. He's going to finish what he started in you. So maybe the bigger question today is this: what has God started in you already? What has he started in you already? Has he already put it on your heart? Has he already begun to use his Spirit to kind of stir some things in your heart and in your mind today? You know, I think I need to do this. He put it there, and he's going to finish what he started. Maybe for you, it's just daily getting into God's word. Maybe it's some of the basics. For me, it's always been the basics. Rich, are you going to pray today? Rich, are you going to spend time like not doing something and just being with me? Maybe God who began a good work in you is going to see that through to completion. So then the question then becomes, am I willing to pay the cost? Am I willing to pay the cost to take that one more step closer and allow Jesus to continue to nurture that in my heart and in my life? Maybe for some of you, it's a question of the relationships that you're in. Maybe for some of you, it's the question of the jobs that you're in. Maybe for some of you, it's the question of the friendships that you're in. Whatever the case is, what is God already beginning to do in your life? What has God already planted a seed for in your life? What is he trying to bring about to fullness in your life? And are you willing to participate with that? If you are, usually Jesus asks you to make some decisions. And those decisions are the cost. So count the cost. What do you need to do in your life today? And can I just challenge you from experience? Don't let anything get in the way of following Jesus the way he's called you to follow him. I wish that I could be like some super spiritual guy and stand in front of you and say, I have no regrets in my Christian walk. I've done everything perfectly. The day I met Jesus, everything went on the altar. Nope. That's not how it worked for me. The day I became a pastor, everything went on the altar. Nope. In fact, yeah, sure, everything did, and then I was like, I'll stick that one back in my pocket, and this one and that one, and then I come to another Christ, lay it all down again. This is why he says daily, pick up your cross and follow me. It's a journey. And I'm very glad to say today that even though I have regrets in my Christian walk where I was not, I did let things get in the way of following Jesus the way that he had called me to follow him, I'm so grateful today that those things over a journey are becoming less and less. There's also becoming this weird, strange part of me too that's willing to be like, okay, what else can I give up to be able to do that? What else can I say no to so that I can say yes to this and this and this? Which is weird, and I know I'm making my wife really nervous right now. But it's an exciting place to live because I think that's real life. I think that's real life. When you're solely yielded to the lordship of Jesus Christ and in the work of his Spirit, man, he can take you anywhere he wants to. And you truly experience real life, that place where he's called you to follow him. That's my prayer for you today. Because I have a hard time always ending on a serious note also, don't be a punk. So I'm going to ask you to stand if you would. I have a good friend who gave me that mug a number of years ago. He and I had this affinity for the artist that drew these. Then when he gave me the cup, it caused me to wonder, like, are you trying to tell me something? But I just love Jesus. And I'm so glad that really at the end of the day, he really just wants us to love each other and love him more and more and more. Find ways every day. Find ways every day to give yourself more and more to him. Father, thank you for these challenging parables. Thank you that it's not just really as simple as a lesson, and that honestly sometimes it is. Thank you for being so clear to us about what you desire for us. And we know, Father, and there's plenty of people in this room right now that can testify to the fact that there has been a cost to them saying yes. In fact, in a few weeks, we're going to see baptisms take place in this room. People celebrating brand new life because of what you've done for them in Jesus Christ. When we see people immersed in that water and they come back up, imitating the death and resurrection of Jesus, and where Romans tells us that they've been crucified with Christ, it is no longer they who live, but Christ who lives in them, that death and birth. Father, we know that there's a cost associated with those choices and those decisions. I know there are people in this room right now experiencing some of that cost relationally, in their jobs. Draw close to them today. Help them. Give them a peace and an assurance and the strength and endurance to keep moving on as we all continue to live under the lordship of Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen. Hey, before we read our benediction together, I am meeting with a group of people who are interested in baptism. We're going to be meeting in the community space next to the coffee house. So if you signed up for that, or if you just want to learn more, I'll be in there in hopefully about 2 minutes. And we'll be able to kind of go through a few things briefly today. Thank you for being here. Our benediction's on the screen. Would you read this with me? May the bond of peace of Jesus Christ go with us as we seek to love God as one. May he guide us in humility, gentleness, and patience as we love people as we have been loved. May the compassion of Jesus Christ be in us as we serve the world in word and deed, and may he bring us together again, rejoicing as his children as we live in real life with Christ. God bless you. Thank you for being here today.